This is the first part of a two-part podcast on the Washington administration and the events that led to the formation of two political parties, the Federalists and the Republicans. George Washington was viewed as a symbol of national unity and self-sacrifice as he retired from public life after the war, when some wanted him to go on to become a military ruler. This is a statue of Washington that can be found on Wall Street in New York City. It's because New York City was the temporary capital of the new government, and this is where Washington took the oath of office to become the first president of the United States. John Adams became the first vice president. As you can see, he didn't think much of the office. He called it the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived. Washington did not look to Adams for political advice much during his 2 terms as president. Many of the political leaders in the founding generation believed that organized political parties would be divisive, disruptive, and therefore should be avoided. But as issues arose in the Washington administration and in the first Congress, parties quickly formed and spread throughout the country. Some of these disputes took place in Washington's own cabinet. Washington's cabinet was made up of the 4 secretary positions that existed at the time. Alexander Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury. Thomas Jefferson was Secretary of State. Henry Knox was the Secretary of War, and Edmund Randolph was the Attorney General. Today, the cabinet has 15 positions with the heads of the 15 different executive branch departments that now exist. This is a picture of the Obama cabinet that was taken in 2009. Hamilton and Jefferson are going to become the philosophical leaders of these 2 political parties. Alexander Hamilton's followers were known as the Federalists, whereas Thomas Jefferson's followers become known as Republicans. One of the disputes that helped bring about the formation of these political parties was a debate over Alexander Hamilton's fiscal program. Being the Secretary of the Treasury, it was up to Alexander Hamilton to put forth a program for what the nation's financial policies would look like. Alexander Hamilton's goals was to base a financial plan on Great Britain. He hoped that it would stabilize the nation's finances. He wanted to gain support of powerful financiers in the country, and he wanted to foster economic development. He hoped that if he did these things, that the United States would become a world military and commercial power. The first part of Hamilton's fiscal program was something called assumption. He wanted to pay off all national and state debts from the Revolution. He believed that this new national debt would help tie wealthy investors to the national government. So assumption meant that the federal government would assume all state debts from the Revolutionary time period. And this was controversial in the South because the South had already paid off their war debts and did not understand why they now had to be responsible for paying off the debts of the northern states. The second part to Hamilton's fiscal program was the establishment of a Bank of the United States. He viewed this would be a private corporation that would hold government funds, make loans, and also make profits for its stockholders. Hamilton wanted to raise revenue for the new national government, and to do this, he proposed a tax on whiskey. He also, in a separate report on manufacturing, proposed tariffs and government subsidies to help develop factories in the United States that would be able to produce goods that were previously being imported from Europe. The Federalist Party supported Hamilton's fiscal programs, and Federalists were mainly made up of financiers, manufacturers, and merchants who wanted close ties with Britain. Thomas Jefferson was fearful of an urban, manufacturing-based economy with close ties to bankers and business leaders. His supporters become known as Republicans. They did not want close ties with Britain, and they thought that an urban manufacturing government with close ties to commercial capitalists would lead to a loss of American freedoms. Jefferson envisioned a country of independent farmers who would sell their goods to the world through free trade. Venerate the plow, a nation of virtuous yeoman farmers. Republicans had much support in the South for three reasons. One, there was a lack of investors and holders of government bonds. Two, they were a planter economy, so they had very little support for manufacturing in the South. And the third reason, as stated earlier, the South had already paid off much of their war debts and did not support Hamilton's Assumption program. Debate sparked of whether or not Hamilton's fiscal program was constitutional or not, specifically whether the Bank of the United States would be constitutional. Two views of the Constitution emerged: strict constructionist and loose construction. A strict constructionist believes that the federal government could only use the powers that were explicitly stated in the Constitution. Republicans believe that if the Constitution did not give the federal government a power specifically, then that power did not exist. And they believed that the Constitution said nothing about a Bank of the United States. Therefore, the federal government did not have the power to make one. Hamilton and his group believed in loose construction theory. And this loose construction theory came from two things in Article 1, Section 8. Article 1 deals with the Congress. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, it said that Congress had the ability to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. In Clause 18, it said that Congress had the ability to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying out the new government. These two things, to promote the general welfare and to provide laws that were necessary and proper, Hamilton and his supporters believed in something now known as the Elastic Clause. In other words, that the Constitution could be stretched in order to do things that were needed for the government and for the survival of the government. Well, one of the early traditions in American history and one of the early themes of American history that we're going to see, dating back to the Constitutional Convention, is this idea of compromise. And compromise was needed in order to pass Hamilton's fiscal program. And this compromise actually happened at a dinner at Madison's house, in which there were three people who were there: Alexander Hamilton, Madison, and Jefferson. And compromise helped secure the passage of Hamilton's fiscal program. This compromise would be that the nation's new capital would be located between Virginia and Maryland. The reason for this is Southerners were fearful that the new capital would end up in New York or Pennsylvania, where these banks would be. And they feared that if the capital was too close to the nation's financial center, that government and finance would become too closely tied. Therefore, they wanted it closer to the South. The capital that is between Virginia, so Hamilton gets his Bank of the United States. Here you can see a picture of it in Pennsylvania. And the picture on the bottom left-hand corner is how it would have looked back then. And the Southerners get there, and the Republicans get their capital, which is now Washington, D.C., in the South on the Potomac River. And this is the plans for what the capital would look like. This is an aerial view of what the Capitol looks like today.